All right, my dear friends and colleagues, welcome to my screencast of Teaching Writing, the 2013-2014 trends that I observed. I'm going to be discussing today 35 articles that I selected from 3 different journals. I did not span over the 8 journals because, as you can see, there's an entire journal dedicated to second language writing, so I really had a lot of material to look at. Also keep in mind from the journals that I selected, about 1/3 of the articles that I'm talking about today came from English for academic purposes, so they are going to have an academic focus. All of the articles I looked at had a qualitative data collection method, and most of them used that in conjunction with quantitative. 32 of the 35 articles used convenience sampling, and only 9 of the studies used more than 30 participants. And the more than 30 ranged from 30 participants to 480. What that means is the information that I'm giving you today comes a lot from data collected from case studies. So 2 students, 4 students, 7 students, and a lot of single student case studies that are being looked at. 4 of the articles focused on teachers for data collection, investigating their feedback methods and correction methods, and also looking into their identity as teachers. But since that was a small portion, I won't be discussing that in this PowerPoint today. The rest of the articles focused on students, and they were primarily graduate and undergraduate students. Again, that may be because of the academic leaning, but that's a lot of the data that I'll be talking about today comes from that demographic. The context, fairly evenly split, a little more ESL that I'm looking at. These are the countries represented for EFL, in case you're curious. The trends I'm going to be discussing today are student process, so that means investigating the steps that students take when they're taking on a certain kind of writing task, and maybe the type of vocabulary that they use and the methods that they use to integrate different types of materials into their writing. The second one is from researchers challenging the direction of teachers and programs for teaching writing. So sort of challenging the notion of what are we teaching, why are we teaching it, could there be a better approach to writing, and could there perhaps be less of a focus on accuracy and more of a focus on fluency and other things like that. The third trend I'll be talking about today is student as a whole person. So a lot of this is about identity and the students' context and their experience as writers and what they bring to the process of writing that may shift how that is approached and what the end product is because of their identity. So first, student process, the steps that students take to go about their writing. So this is some investigations of students using the right kind of vocab for the right kind of genre and how they may or may not select that and how they may or may not come off as competent users of English because they're using vocab from perhaps the wrong genre or they're using it from the right genre. This also looks at process that students take at low levels and higher levels for looking at reading and looking at maybe listening and things like that and other texts of writing and how they take this information, maybe synthesize it, and how they integrate it into their writing and the process that takes. And finally, the different processes that a single student or a couple students may have with different types of tasks. So comparing across tasks with the person staying the same and how their process differs with the task. Researchers challenging the direction of how we teach writing and perhaps the mark that we're aiming for should be changed. So a lot of articles calling for writing to become more about meaning making. A lot of this focused on systemic functional linguistics and sociocultural theory. They were mentioned explicitly in many of the articles that discuss these themes. And it's a focus really on writing not so much as a task we must do to achieve a certain thing in a writing class, but rather as another way to communicate, another way to learn from content by writing, and the importance of fluency and meaning over, accuracy and things like that. And down here I have grammatical metaphor as possibly a new focus in the classroom being explicitly taught as a way to take systemic functional linguistics and look at grammatical metaphor showing ways that perhaps fluent users of English are using the language versus students that are coming off as just like not quite fluent, and how can we explicitly teach those grammatical metaphor strategies to make them come off as more competent writers in English. Finally, student as a whole person. So what does the individual student bring to the goal of the writing task, and also how might they be disadvantaged? This is based a lot of these are themed around critical theory. So the idea of multilingualism is really popular and being discussed right now in the literature, and there were several investigations of maybe how teachers identify as accepting multilingualism but may not show that in the classroom. So how teachers should be adapting to a student as a whole person, how they should do a needs analysis, and change the task to depend on the student and the context, and to show the strengths of multilingualism. Also identity, students identifying their own ideas about writing and how they are as writers, and how that really plays a crucial role in the process and all of the steps that students take when they're composing something. Finally, collaborative tasks. This was mentioned in several of the articles, and I thought it was really important to highlight. It wasn't a lot of the articles, it was about 3, but I think it's really interesting, these ideas of when you're having students work on a collaborative writing task, and they might be native speaker, non-native speaker, the power inequality that exists, and the outcomes that students may have from that, and how they develop as how their identity develops as part of the class and as a writer and as taking part in this shared task, and what kind of things teachers should do to sort of make that work out better for everyone involved, which I'll talk about when I talk about pedagogical implications. All right, so now I'm going to talk about a sample article that I think really highlights a lot about what I was talking about, and I'll try to be quick because I'm running short on time. But I'm going to be discussing this article by Wan, and some of the things that I noticed in it that I thought really were representative of a lot of the trends were that the study was small. It was a case study. Only 7 students were analyzed. They were Chinese students, which is also a trend that I saw across articles, is that a lot of Chinese students are having their work analyzed for this data. They were master's students, which was also part of the trends, and he used a socio-cultural framework to look at how students might talk about themselves as writers and how they might use critical thinking as a way to really delve into what it means to be a writer, what a certain kind of writing means, and how writing is really a social process that's involving more communication than it is just achieving a task at the end. And he found that metaphors did help the students, he says, in at least 3 ways. So it sort of expanded their ideas of how they understand certain parts of student writing. So they might have had an idea of student writing as being a task you achieve, but they changed their notion of it as more of a communicative process. They also thought more critically about their own writing, and that led to more positive motivation towards writing and their own identities as writers. And finally, he also looked at academic writing and their own writing practices, and how it sort of shifted their idea of academic writing and their voice and identity in academic writing. So I thought that was a really interesting study and a really great representation of sort of the themes that I saw in a good amount of these articles. So finally, pedagogical implications, which I think are really fun and really great. So we're almost done, and I'm going to run out of time a little bit, but I'm sorry. I'll be quick. Some of the implications found across these articles that I thought were really important to highlight because they were mentioned so many times is being really explicit about certain things in the classroom. So when you're teaching sources and plagiarism and how to cite things and use textual information, be explicit about what you want, why you want it, especially culture and why citations matter. So some students may have some resistance and some pushback against why am I trying so hard not to plagiarize. And it's important to have a conversation about why that's important in American culture and why we're learning about plagiarism. Also explicitly teaching reporting verbs when it comes to teaching sources. So helping students maybe do an investigative task with a corpus, and looking at different types of reporting verbs that fluent users of English use in their writing. When using collaboration, I discussed this earlier, make sure that students are aware of power inequalities, so that they can have a more authentic interaction that isn't blocked, perhaps by just, being used to maybe taking a back seat and taking a leadership role. Have a discussion about trying to work together on a task, and the outcomes could be better. So those were things to be explicit about. Things to not be explicit about are recommendations for argument papers. If you're teaching the process of writing an argument paper, actually inquiry and exploration, with scaffolding onto what's an argument paper, what are we looking for, but really allowing students to delve into their own understandings of what an argument paper should look like is better than just explicitly teaching, here's the structure for an argument paper in America. Rather, let them sort of explore what are other people doing, and not just in America, but all over, using English as an argument, as a way to write an argumentative paper. What are they doing, and how can I maybe mimic that and use it in my own way? Some other implications or suggestions are to use authentic materials and tasks, which of course we talk about all the time, and also this idea of incorporating systemic functional linguistics in the classroom so that students can really develop an awareness to this idea of language being a way to communicate with each other and a social process and a meaningful process rather than just a task that they're having to do. And then inquiry and exploratory methods to teach argument papers specifically in business case reports. So this is an idea, I'm sorry, I spoke recently or just previously about the argument papers, but this idea of business case reports as a specific genre that may lend to inquiry and exploration to figure out sort of, what is this form that I'm looking at and how can I try to mimic it and use it in my own way. Okay, we made it. 13 minutes-ish, but we made it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And if you have questions, just let me know. See you guys soon.